As we head into the Switch's twilight years, I thought it would be interesting to take a quick survey of which of Nintendo's recurring first party franchises had the most outing on the system and how these compare. Are there any surprises and which franchises appear over or under represented? Now, it's a little tricky even defining terms. Some games, such as Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, and Super Mario 3D All Stars, were limited edition, but I've still counted them. Others are smaller titles like Super Mario Bros. 35, and some like Pokemon Legends ZA aren't even out yet, but are confirmed. Then there are titles like Mario plus Rabbids, which weren't Nintendo published, but are clearly Nintendo adjacent games. I've decided all of these count, and also I have counted as separate, even titles like Bayonetta and Pikmin, which have been collected as 1 plus 2 packs, but which are ultimately available to be purchased individually, as opposed to, say, Advance Wars 1 plus 2 Reboot Camp, which were originally 2 games, but now clearly only represent one single package on Switch. I have also included a separate Torn of the Golden Country as separate from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, since it did have its own release. In fact, the only ones I've ruled out are cameo or guest appearances in other franchise, so Mario Kart may feature Link, but it is a Zelda title, and by the same metric, even though Kirby and Mario star in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, I don't think you could really say they're Kirby or Mario games either. Or at least for the purpose of this video, that's not how I've counted them. So let's go down the list. Jointly at the bottom, we have a group of franchises which had just 2 titles: WarioWare, One to Switch, Luigi's Mansion, Splatoon, and Donkey Kong Country. Obviously, if you allow subcategories of Mario like Paper Mario, then this list is longer, but let's move on up to the series with 3 games. Here we have the arguable case of Famicom Detective Club. The first 2 titles are available separately, so I've counted them as such, even though particularly in Japan, there is a physical version with both the first 2 on the same cartridge. It's pretty cool that a franchise so long forgotten now even makes the list. Also on 3 games for the system, we have Metroid, which at the time of writing, of course, has just the 2 games to show for itself, but Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is winging its way towards us. Plus, if you count Nintendo Switch Online, the series now has quite a respectable showing. Moving on up to those series with 4 outings on the system, we have Bayonetta, Labo, and Pikmin. All of these deserve an asterisk, really. Bayonetta 1 plus 2 launched together, as did the first 2 Labo Toy-Con, as did Pikmin 1 plus 2. Still, because they're all arguable in their own right, they make a nice little class of their own, the 3 to 4. Just landing outside the top 5 is Xenoblade. Even if Torna is a bit of a soft one to allow, as its DLC, which did just happen to get a physical version, with 2 mainline games and 2 remakes, Xenoblade has a healthy representation, and because the franchise is relatively young, in its Blade form anyway, not talking about the older Xeno games such as Xenogears, it can claim all the Xenoblade titles on the single system, which is pretty cool. From now on, though, we can get to a true top 5 of Nintendo franchises by discrete releases on the Nintendo Switch, and actually the 4th and 5th slots are joint with 6 entries each. First to mention is Fire Emblem. This total is bolstered by the Fire Emblem's Warriors games, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, as well as Three Houses and Engage. I haven't counted the Warriors as their own category, but if you did group the Hyrule and Fire Emblem Warriors titles together, then you'd have 4 different titles in that genre as well. Also, joint 4th, but with 6 titles as well, we have Kirby. Granted, 3 of these are smaller eShop games, but nevertheless, Kirby's 3 substantial retail titles put him on a good footing compared with most others on this list. And as we go forward, I guess things are going to be getting even more predictable. And number 3, we have Zelda. Counting Cadence of Hyrule and the Hyrule Warriors titles brings us to 8 titles in total, meeting the once rumoured aspiration from Nintendo of putting out Zelda titles at a rate of 1 per year, albeit with 2 in 2019 and none in 2022. Number 2 sees us reach Pokemon, with 12 titles, 2 of which have yet to release. I haven't counted the dual releases as multiple titles, so Sword and Shield or Scarlet and Violet, but if I did, it would bump up the number to 16. It wouldn't make a difference to the rankings though, because it won't astonish you, but the top of the tree is Mario with 23 titles at the time of writing. Indeed, if you count the many spin-off titles like Princess Peach, Captain Toad, and Luigi's Mansion, then the numbers are even higher in the plumber's favour. The big surprise to me in this list is actually Animal Crossing. Given that the first and only Switch game is the console's second highest seller, it seems striking that there isn't at least a second retail release, although to be fair, Happy Home Paradise is larger than many of the discrete titles on this list, and in fact, had New Horizons not been such a huge seller that they could use it as a way to leverage Animal Crossing fans to the expansion pack, perhaps they would have gone the 3DS route and sold it as a separate retail title. This just shows that in a way, these numbers are fairly arbitrary, but it still prompts the question of whether Switch 2 will match this breadth of distribution. My hunch is that the top three, Mario, Pokemon, and Zelda, are unlikely to change. Kirby is also a fair bet to stay at the top of the list, although with one asterisk. The loss of smaller studios such as Vanpool puts more pressure on HAL, and they may conclude that the huge success of Kirby and the Forgotten Land shows that it's more worthwhile having fewer, bigger titles than diversifying too much. On the other hand, as we see with Pikmin and Famicom Detective Club, franchises can come racing up from the back. If Nintendo decide to really dig into Donkey Kong, it's possible to imagine multiple games in this series. Equally, Zelda has been buoyed by the establishment of multiple recurring series, including the 2D series and Hyrule Warriors. So if a recurring Splatoon spin-off were established, we could potentially get a lot more titles. I've got another video on the Patreon focusing on the Picross series, and at present it seems like Nintendo don't have a huge amount of interest in the series, but if Jupiter and Nintendo realigned, then the various Nintendo Picross titles could easily zoop into the top 5. As for titles likely to dip, one has to be Xenoblade. With Xenoblade games both in the first and last years of Switch and Torna slightly artificially bumping up their numbers, Switch did do very well by Xenoblade. But if Monolith Soft's next mainline Xenoblade follows the current rhythm, it would not be for over a year, and we're assuming that Monolith Soft don't decide to explore a non-Xenoblade game at some point. Fire Emblem is in the opposite position since it didn't have a release for the first 2 years of Switch's life and hasn't had a release in the last 2 years of Switch. 3 mainline Fire Emblems on the next system feels far more likely, and add-on Warriors titles and possibly some other spin-offs, and I could see Fire Emblem doing pretty well. Equally, I struggle to see Pikmin hitting 4 games on the next console, even if they decided to give Hey Pikmin another lease on life to try to sweat that asset. Unlikely given the game's rather tepid reception, but not impossible since the franchise is far higher profile now than it was in 2017, but this is only just one game. I think Pikmin would need to move into the Kirby zone of having smaller eShop titles emerging more frequently in order to hit that kind of number, which is of course possible if they do more things in the nature of Pikmin Bloom. But if you think there are other franchises which might sneak ahead, let me know. Perhaps F-Zero will become a Nintendo mainstay, and who could rule out Switch Sports becoming a more regular series. Check out these videos on screen for more. Thank you as ever for watching, liking, sharing, commenting and subscribing, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.